In 1955, the black community of Montgomery, Alabama decided that they were going to boycott the public transportation system to protest segregation. This was a massive undertaking on their part because so many people use public transit to get to their jobs or to be able to go to the grocery store. Yet, in doing so, they were able to have a huge impact. Without the fares from the black community, the Montgomery public transit system went bankrupt. And after 382 days of protest, the Supreme Court handed down a major decision stating that it was illegal for the bus system to segregate out its riders. This was a huge win for the civil rights movement at the time. And they thought that this would create the momentum that would eventually result in a more fair and equitable society. Unfortunately, that's not what happened. With every win from the civil rights movement, the white supremacists would push back, often violently. The Ku Klux Klan, they would go about killing members of the black community, knowing that they likely would not even be taken to court. And because of this, many people who would have volunteered for the movement, they started to back away. Now in 1963, after 8 years of lunch counter sit-ins, freedom rides, forced school integrations, the movement had all but come to a halt. Racism in the South was as bad as it has ever been. Racism in the North wasn't much better. The KKK was trying to assassinate the leaders of the civil rights movement. Protesters were getting arrested by police and beaten with impunity. And the black community was becoming fatigued and people didn't want to volunteer their time anymore. Now this attrition, it was so bad that the leaders of the civil rights movement, they actually wondered whether or not it was going to fail. In fact, Martin Luther King Jr. privately confessed that he was burned out and he didn't know whether or not anything that they were doing would result in substantive change. And to punctuate those doubts, when he was organizing for the protests that were going to happen in Birmingham, he couldn't get any adults from the community to really volunteer for them. Like a lot of them were very reluctant to do so. And the reason why is because the police force was backed by the KKK. They knew it was super dangerous. So King, when he arrived, he had to pivot and he started recruiting teenagers and young adults into the movement. And to be honest, the parents were livid. They couldn't believe that he was going to put their children in harm's way, but he had no choice. He needed protesters and he needed a win in Birmingham. So he starts teaching these young people all of the tactics of nonviolent resistance. And the day comes where they're going to protest and there's media all over the place. And one photographer took a very famous photograph. It was of a police dog attacking a young black teenage boy. And this picture, it just went viral. I mean, it literally went all over the country. It was on the front pages of all the newspapers. And this allows the momentum to start to pick up again. It sparks it. And then all these people come to the March on Washington. And this is where King gives his famous I Have a Dream speech. Then the KKK, they struck back. They blew up the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, killing 4 little girls, injuring a 5th. This backfired on them because that created more momentum, which ultimately allowed for the Civil Rights Act to be signed into law in February of 1964. Now, if King had listened to those doubts, if he had given up, then February of 1964 would have never happened. Doubt is something that we all deal with. The author, Susie Kasim, once said, "Doubt kills more dreams than failure ever will." Doubt is that voice in the back of your mind that's always whispering to you that you're going to fail. So the question is, where does doubt come from? How do we overcome doubt? And how do we gain back our confidence when doubt has consumed us? To begin, I want to introduce you to a friend of mine who has dealt with a very specific form of doubt that we've all dealt with, which is better known as impostor syndrome. Will you join me in the kitchen? Well, I want to welcome Kristen Walter to the show. So Kristen, what we do on Kokoro, whenever we have this segment, is we always have a food that mirrors a theme. And so today, because of the theme of the show, you and I are going to be talking about imposter syndrome. I decided that I was going to make California rolls because I think for a lot of real sushi eaters, California rolls are considered fake, although they can be very, very good. So I made these for you. I thought, let's start with one, and then we can dive in to the imposter syndrome. Sure. So the imposters of sushi. Are you ready to
Absolutely.
roll?
Let's try it.
All right, so cheers. That's actually not too bad, all considering. First of all, let's just begin by you telling us a little bit about like your background, what you've done.
My major in college was vocal performance, and then I changed to education because I really liked thinking about how sound was made. Graduated, started teaching, was in education for 20 years. But from that, and this is sort of where my career starts to jump a bit. I was at a school that just really believed in excellence for not only children and all children, measuring growth for everyone, but for the adults as well. And so it was really, how do we grow adult leaders? But we won a lot of awards. I started consulting with Crayola, the crayon company, and piloting a lot of their game design kits in my classroom, thinking about how you use design thinking to teach all subjects, not just art and music. And eventually they hired me to manage their initiatives on education in the Midwest. So we relocated to this area outside of Chicago. Then decided that I was already working really heavily in literacy through the lens of how can the arts help improve reading. So just most recently took a job as an executive director of a nonprofit that puts books in the home by mailing books home to children and partnering with schools and districts and other organizations where kids might not have access to books in their house.
So you're a CEO now.
I am, yeah.
Okay. Part of what we're here to talk about today is imposter syndrome.
Right.
So do me a favor, because we've talked about kind of that feeling.
Right.
Like in your opinion, like define what you think imposter syndrome is. Like that feeling.
Right. I think it's that feeling of when you walk in a room and you don't know anyone and you think, wow, do I really belong here? Or when you take a new job and you look at how talented the people around you are, and you're wondering, wow, am I as talented as the people around me? And I think self-efficacy and imposter syndrome are tied very closely together. Self-efficacy is the belief in yourself to accomplish a task. And so the higher your belief in yourself of having the skills to do that task, the more likely you are to be able to accomplish that task.
Have you been in points, in your life where you felt like, oh, these people really know what they're doing?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So I think early on, when I was, more heavily active in performing in music, and there is always someone who's going to be more talented than you are in the room. And that's just a fact. And that's beyond music. Like there's always going to be somebody you might have more skills than, and there's always going to be someone who has more skills than you. Like I would struggle with that a lot when I was younger. And this is, I think, where self-efficacy comes in. I really felt like I didn't have the skills to manage a budget. And that was the thing that blocked me from thinking about my career path, was my belief that I couldn't do math.
Interesting.
And so, but I can even remember sitting in a board meeting with people, guys who are financial guys, and just feeling so out of my league, like I do not belong here. And I look back on that, and I really think it was my own belief in I don't understand numbers that was a blocker for me to feeling like I fit into a larger management world.
I think there's a voice that a lot of people have in the back of their minds. I certainly have it, where it feels to me like it's whispering at me all the time saying, you don't really know what you're doing and you're gonna fail.
Yeah.
Which absolutely. I think is a big part of kind of trying to, you have to overcome this. So do you hear that voice? Is that?
I do, and it's so funny because this was a conversation I was just having with someone else. As children, this inner voice is our conscious to tell us to do right and wrong. But I think as adults, that inner voice sometimes turns into that nagging doubt that, do you belong, or do you have the skills to do this? It was a real epiphany to me that my voice is not always right. And I think a lot of us always rely on that voice, but that voice might not always be telling you the truth. But I always have to counter that inner voice and say, when I walk in a room and I feel doubt, I'm like, okay, what is the proof in that? Why do I not belong here? And if there's nothing to back that up, I, say to myself, when I get out of this car, that voice is done. Like, I'm done with that voice. Or when I walk in this room, that voice is going to be quiet.
That's nice. So you actually like talk to yourself. You talk yourself through it, and you're like, look, no more.
I analyze the whole thing. So it's very much and I've learned to do that. It took me a long time to get to that point in my life. I would say well into my 30s, probably even into my 40s. And so it's really relying on the data to back up my inner voice. It helps me know if that's the right thing to listen to or not.
If there was one thing you could tell someone who was really struggling with feeling like they weren't the right person for this role, this job, whatever it was that they were doing, what's the one thing you would say to help them overcome that?
I think it's really just relying on the data to back up your inner voice and the facts around you, not letting opinion and not letting, even your own opinion keep you back from doing something because you feel like you can't do it. Like, look at the people who are doing it already. How well how do you align with what they're doing? Do you have those skills? And I think when we look at it through a very real lens, you find you have more skills than you think you have.
Thank you for coming in and being here. Thank you for trying. Do you want to end with one more, just for the heck of it?
Sure.
All right. Yeah, there we go. Thanks. Thank you for being here. Mm-hmm. I had a very contentious relationship with my mother when I was growing up. She was always very negative towards me, very critical. I can't tell you the number of times that she called me stupid or an idiot. Well, we ended up getting into a lot of fights. I was indignant. We would just go at it all the time. And what I couldn't understand was how somebody who supposedly loved me would say such hurtful things to me. The sad thing is that I actually believed my mom. I believed that I was stupid. I believed that I was going to fail. And this is actually where I think a lot of our doubts start. It starts with people in our lives who tell us something about ourselves and we believe them. But even if I didn't believe that I was a very smart person, I knew I had a really good work ethic. I knew I could work really hard. And so as I was entering into high school, I made the goal of my life to work really hard to prove my mother wrong. Now, I didn't have the grades to get into a top-ranked school. I couldn't do that. But I was a year-round swimmer, and I had been relatively successful. And so I hoped that whatever talent that I had in the pool could make up for what I lacked in terms of my GPA. Thanks to a lot of luck and being in the right place at the right time, I ended up getting a swimming scholarship to Rice University. And I was kind of blown away by this because Rice is a place where they accept mostly valedictorians and salutatorians. And so the fact that my coaches thought that I could be successful at Rice said that they saw some potential in me that other people had overlooked. Well, now my mother is going to have to accept that I actually am somebody who can do something. Like she must see how she is wrong about me. So the day comes where it's time for us to take a flight from Virginia down to Houston. And we get on the plane and I'm sitting next to my mom on this flight. And at one point she looks over at me and she says, "You're not going to do well there. Unlike you, these people are really smart. You're not going to have anything in common with them. Nobody's going to like you." And I remember looking over at her and looking her straight in the eye and saying, "Well, I disagree. I think I'm going to do really well and I'll find my people." So my parents leave me, and I wish I could tell you that conversation, I never thought about it again, but I did. And my mom's voice was always whispering to me, and I was hearing her say, "You're not smart enough to be here. Eventually they're going to figure out you're a fraud and you'll fail." Well, as I got to know people, what I came to realize was I was in good company. even among these students who were super intelligent at the top of their class, even they had doubts about whether or not they belonged there. And this is when I realized that if these people on the outside who seem so intelligent, so put together, so successful, that if they are harboring doubts about their abilities, then everyone does. The difference between them and everybody else is they have the ability to cast those doubts aside. So what I want to talk about next is how we can overcome those doubts. I want to talk about how we can silence or at least turn down the volume on those doubts that are whispering to us in the back of our mind. Will you join me upstairs? Doubt is an insidious beast. The more you allow doubt to occupy your mind, the more it has the ability to incapacitate you. Doubt will prod at you until you eventually give up. The moment you say, you know what, I'm not going to be able to succeed, there's no point, why am I even trying? That's when you know doubt has won. So how do you prevent those seeds of doubt from taking root in your mind? Well, in my experience, what you need are little victories, little wins that give you the confidence that you can succeed. I have friends who are mountain climbers, and when they are climbing a particularly hard mountain, they talk about how they can't focus on the summit. They have to focus on the section they're dealing with right now, because if they can do that section, that's going to give them the confidence to be able to do the next section. But if they start thinking about the summit, well, there's just too much distance between them and the summit, and it feels overwhelming. The same is true for people who suffer from addiction. The road out of addiction for many is filled with doubt. And this is why the mantra of many addicts is 1 day at a time, or even for some, 1 hour at a time. But the principle is still the same, which is that whatever it is that you're trying to achieve, you need to approach it in small, manageable chunks that will ultimately give you confidence that you can build on those chunks. And eventually one day, you're gonna wake up and you're gonna say to yourself, oh my God, I did that thing that I never thought I could do. But because you took it in small little slices, you were able to get there. But just because you've overcome doubt in one area of your life, that doesn't mean that you've vanquished doubt from your mind completely. If we go back to the example of the civil rights movement that I talked about at the beginning, that movement had lots of little wins along the way. But yet the doubt of whether or not they were going to succeed was still very strong. But the reason why King didn't give up and all the other leaders is because they had a huge supportive community around them that was lifting them up and helping them to believe in themselves. And this is really important for overcoming doubt. You have to replace the voices of negativity that are back there that you're going to fail with positive ones that you're going to be able to succeed. You need people around you who are lifting you up, who are encouraging you, who can see the best of who you are, who sees your potential, and they're not willing to allow you to give up. Now that type of community can be very hard to come by. And so if you're looking for that, I want to encourage you to become part of the Kokoro community. So beginning in January, we're going to start doing live shows on Patreon with the goal of creating a community that supports one another so that you can become the person who you want to be. Whatever that is, we're trying to help you reach your potential. But in order for that to happen, you have to replace those negative voices with positive ones. And that is what Kokoro is all about. So no matter who you are, no matter where you've been, no matter how you feel, please know that you are loved, you are seen, and you are cared for. If by no one else, by me. My name is Alex Lang, and until next time.